budget. It was last held in the UK in 2007 in Kent, where it generated around £90 million for the economy. At this time, organisers are expecting an economic impact of over £100 million. Since the Olympics, one of the demands put on all big events is that they have some sort of inspirational legacy value. We had an awful lot about legacy, didn't we, with 2012, the Olympics, and we're hearing the same for the Commonwealth Games as well. And there's been pressure for the UK part of the tour to do more for women's cycling. Well, I've been speaking to Chrissie Wellington, as I say, four-time Team GB World Ironman champion. I asked her why there wasn't a women's Tour de France already.
It did suffer from a lack of media coverage and commercial investment, and eventually it was reduced in the number of days, and eventually it was cancelled altogether. Nicole Cook was the last winner of the women's tour, the talented British cyclist. So there has been a history of having a women's race, but not simultaneously with the men's race. It was never held simultaneously.
Okay, so that's why you're saying you'll be able to get round, because media coverage isn't going to suddenly appear from nowhere, is it? And investment's not going to suddenly appear from nowhere either. But you're saying you get round that this time, potentially, by doing it at the same time as the men's race.
Yeah, I think that there are two answers to that. I think first, the climate for cycling has changed. I think especially in the last few years that the Olympics has very much helped with that. But we've seen a huge growth in interest in women's cycling, and also in the strength and the depth of female peloton. Not only interest amongst the public, but increasing coverage amongst in the media. So I think that the commercial and the media interest in women's cycling is definitely growing. So the climate is somewhat different now than it was, say, 10 years ago, and I think we've got the British cyclists, both male and female, to thank for that. But you're correct, having a race simultaneously with the men's race would, I think, significantly assist women's cycling in having the platform that it needs. Crucially, the public need to watch women race, to develop, to garner, to catalyse that further interest in the sport, and given that the Tour is the showcase event for cycling around the world, there's no better place to showcase women's cycling than at the Tour.
Sure, I mean, it's great, I love the Tour de France, but you're not talking about women, let's just be absolutely clear, you're not talking about women starting at the same time as the men, that kind of thing. It would be a women's tour, it would run on the same day as each of the men's stages, the same distances, the same routes, the same everything, but just maybe a bit later on in the day.
Yeah, crucially, what we're not calling for, at least in the short term, is a women's Tour de France. We're not foolish enough to think that a 3-week race run simultaneously with the men is possible, at least in the short term. But what we are calling for, is a race. 1 day, 2 day, any number of days, run simultaneously with the men, perhaps with a separate start. It could be a different distance, but held on some or all of the same course.
So we're 6 months away from the Tour de France, the Grand Depart in Yorkshire, which is going to be exciting in the first place. But you would hope by that point that we would have a women's race happening on the same day.
We're confident in the discussions that we've had with various parties, race organisers, the UCI and others, that having a one-day race at the Tour de France will be possible, yes.
Have you had, what stage are the discussions at with the UCI? Because one of the big cheeses in the Tour de France, Christian Prudhomme, he has said the Tour is massive and it can't keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Of course, there are huge logistical issues, challenges to overcome to host a women's race, and that's been one of the hurdles, one of the enduring hurdles. The Tour is a huge undertaking by any stretch, and to add another race to that, would it be logistically challenging? But we're confident in the discussions that we've had with race organisers, with the UCI, that those challenges can be overcome, and most importantly, that the political will is there now to drive change. I think there's a will across the board at the UCI, the ASO, the organisation that organises the tour, amongst the media, amongst commercial investors to support a women's race. The interest and the will is there to drive this forward, and that's really, really pleasing and incredibly, I guess, comforting to know that I think the support is there for that change to take place.
Excellent to have Chrissie Wellington on the show, the four-time world Ironman champion, and interesting to get her view. Let's speak to the former head of UK Sport, Sir Rodney Walker, also now, more importantly for this, the chairman of the not-for-profit company who are planning the Grand Depart next summer, which, just to be clear, is the first stage of the Tour de France. Good morning, Sir Rodney.
Good morning.
Is there, I mean, Chrissie was talking about the will being there. Is there the will to make this happen?
I think there is a desire that it was logistically possible to try to do something. First of all, I'd like to say I thought that Chrissie gave a very honest interview. She recognised that the organisers of the tour had in previous years organised events and have fallen by the wayside. But as we all know, the profile of cycling over the last few years, because of the successes we've had in both men and women, has grown enormously. And it is true to say that conversations have already taken place about the logistical possibility, or I would say possibility rather than probability, of being able to incorporate a women's race alongside this year's Grand Depart. We're some way away from having reached a decision. My job, as you acknowledged, is to act on behalf of government in delivering the race that has been secured, which is the men's race. At the moment, I'm not funded, nor am I mandated to seek to organise a women's tour.
Sure.
That said, discussions have taken place at high levels in government, with ministers, with the Welcome to Yorkshire, the people that secured the Grand Depart for the first 2 days in Yorkshire, and we are still looking at the possibilities.
What would have to be the deciding factors here, Sir Rodney? What would have to change? What would be the tipping of the balance that would make you and others think yes?
Well, the finance is an issue, of course, and we're not funded to look at the organisation of a women's tour. The logistics of organising the race, the men's race itself, is extremely problematic and extremely difficult. We have to close the roads, as you realise, over 230 miles of roads in Yorkshire and a further 120 miles of roads in the south of England for the third day. Extending that to incorporate a further race is an issue for both the local authorities, all the statutory authorities, fire, police and so on. But I emphasise, talks have taken place, discussions continue, and I think if there was any way that a women's race could be incorporated, I think it would be.
Okay, Sir Rodney, we've got to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. You got your point across. Sir Rodney Walker, former head of UK Sport and behind the firm which is organising the Grand Depart next summer. It's going to be exciting. We'll see if the women will be there as well. First for breaking news and the best live sport.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Yes, good morning. It's 11 o'clock on Friday morning. This is Chris Warburton in for Victoria Derbyshire on 5 Live with the latest news, sport and interviews between now and noon. Thousands of homes still have no power today as another wave of strong winds and storms batter the UK.
In the last half hour, we've had a couple of our weather stations have recorded winds at 79 and 84 miles an hour in the Peak and Lake districts. So obviously that's the concern now for the next good few hours.
We're going to drive out to the Peak District after this. More than 75 flood warnings have been issued across the country. We'll have the latest. And we want to hear from you as well, by the way, if you've been affected, 85058, or if you're being affected today. Also, World Ironman champion Chrissie Wellington has told this programme she's confident there'll be a women's race alongside the 2014 Tour de France Grand Depart when it arrives in Yorkshire.
We're confident in the discussions that we've had with various parties, race organisers, the UCI and others, that having a one-day race at the Tour de France will be possible, yes.
In sport, England's bowlers fight back on day 2 of the 4th test as Australia closed on 164 for 9. And after Brendan Rodgers questions why a referee from Greater Manchester was in charge of Liverpool's defeat at Manchester City, former referee Graham Poll tells this programme managers need to be more careful when criticising officials.
Referees accept it's a matter of opinion. People say you've had a poor game, it was never a penalty, and that's part and parcel of the game. That's everyone's opinion. You don't mind that. What you mind is when someone says you'd never have given it if it wasn't Old Trafford, or you've given it because you live in a certain place, which is the implied bias, the question over your integrity. And given how sensitive things are at the moment with match fixing, I do think managers need to be a little bit more careful about what they're saying after matches.
And if you've been brave with the sales, have you come away with any real bargains? Consumer groups are warning shoppers to watch out for shops increasing prices just before they're discounted, so the deals look better than they actually are. Get in touch if you've managed to get a bargain or if you feel you've been conned. Also, we'll continue to talk about this. What's the worst act of human behaviour you've seen in the sales? We've heard one despicable tale already this morning. If you can do worse, let me know. Not too bad, just a bit of rudeness and a bit of fighting. We have seen some pretty grim pictures on the newspapers today of it all getting a bit intense. 0500 909 693 is the number to call. Text 85058, and you can find me on Twitter as well. It's time to get the latest 5 Live news from Faker Others.
Heavy rain and strong gales are continuing to hit the UK, with already flooded areas in the south of England among those affected. At least 55 flood warnings are currently in place. 5 Live's Leslie Ashmal is in Tunbridge in Kent, where floods are expected again tonight. It's just mud everywhere. It stinks as well, really bad smell. But actually, it's remarkable that anything at all is able to drive in this particular area. This car park that I'm in, outside a supermarket in Tonbridge, was waist high with water a couple of days ago. It receded yesterday. However, people here are being told to expect more flooding again this evening. Around 13,000 homes are still without power. Sharon Beresford hasn't had electricity since Christmas Eve.
The sort of lack of information is the hardest thing, because if we'd have known that we weren't going to have power for days, we could have done something rather than a panic ring round on Christmas Day. I feel let down that they left at 2 o'clock on Christmas Eve, having got the cherry picker there to take down the old cable. I don't understand why at 2 o'clock they didn't reconnect the new cable.
Police are investigating the death of a man whose body was discovered at a house in Nottinghamshire. A woman also critically ill in hospital. 2 children were found at the property unharmed. Our reporter Andy Kershaw is in Coast.
The body of a man was discovered here, and a woman with potentially life-threatening critical injuries taken to a hospital. There were also 2 children here. We understand that 2 boys under 5 who are uninjured, and they've been taken away to a place of safety. The police have got the street cordoned off, but throughout the morning there have been various officers coming and going as police continue to investigate.
At least 5 people are reported to have been killed in a strong explosion in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. It happened near the area where the Prime Minister has his offices. A former Lebanese government minister is among those who died. Reports suggest a suspected suicide bomber has attacked a foreign military convoy on the eastern outskirts of the Afghan capital, Kabul. Police say 6 civilians have been injured. The Taliban's claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, the head of the British Army has warned that some parts of Afghanistan could be retaken by the Taliban following the withdrawal of British troops next year. Sir Peter Wall told the Daily Telegraph the militant group could try to recapture former strongholds as it tries to exert its authority. Search teams looking for a missing British hiker in New Zealand say they've found a body. 41-year-old Andrew Wyatt from Cornwall was last seen almost a fortnight ago. Representatives from Russia, the United States, China and the UN are due to meet in Moscow to discuss the removal of chemical weapons from Syria. John Pascal Sanders is a research fellow with a specialism in disarmament.
What we are talking about in terms of removal are not really chemical weapons in the strict sense of the word, with the exception of some 20 metric tons of mustard gas. The rest are precursors. These are chemicals that still need to react with each other to produce the final nerve agent.
Finally, East African leaders are expected to meet in the Kenyan capital Nairobi to discuss the fighting between government forces and rebels in South Sudan. More than 1,000 people are thought to have been killed in the past 12 days.
Seth has the sports news. Sorry, we normally hear a little thing about phoning in and stuff there, don't we? But we'll forget it for today.
We've got so much to tell you.
Yeah, go on, Seth.
Particularly if you're a fan of cricket, England are finally in a position of strength. They've got a 91-run lead at the close of the second day of the fourth test in Melbourne. Australia reduced to 164 for 9 at stumps, with Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad taking 3 wickets each. Anderson explaining why they had success today. He said, "We just tried to bang out our areas and be as boring as possible and then wait for the breakthroughs." Former Premier League referee Graham Poll has told this programme that managers need to be more careful when they question officials' integrity. It comes after the Liverpool boss, Brendan Rodgers, described Lee Mason's performance at the Etihad yesterday as being horrendous. He also said he was surprised that an official from Greater Manchester was allowed to take charge of the game. Mason lives in Bolton. Meanwhile, we understand that the FA will examine Brendan Rodgers' post-match comments, but any action by the FA relating to this is now not likely to occur until next week. Interesting, Chris, a bit of research for you. Lee Mason has actually officiated at the Etihad before in a match involving Liverpool. It was the Carling Cup semi-finals, and Liverpool won by a goal to nil with a late Steven Gerrard penalty. On that occasion,
good research.
It wasn't mine. I can't claim credit for that, but somebody has been able to find that out. Roberto Mancini, who was the City manager at the time, was really upset, with what happened for the fact that he didn't punish Glenn Johnson.
Oh, there you go. See.
Swings and roundabouts.
He's balanced it out nicely.
Exactly. just one of the quick lines here. Andy Murray is back after back surgery. He's beaten Stanislav Wawrinka in Abu Dhabi in an exhibition tournament in straight sets 6.
He lost yesterday, didn't he, against Songa?
So
fair enough. Songa's pretty good, isn't he?
2 games in 2 days, and it's always better to leave on a high.
It is indeed. Seth, thank you very much. Good morning. It's 8 minutes past 11. It's Chris Warburton with you on 5 Live in for Victoria. And, well, we've been here before, haven't we? Strong winds and rain sweeping across the country this morning. 13,000 homes. Here's the stats for you. 13,000 homes still have no power, even though 25,000 houses have been reconnected overnight. The Met Office is warning winds are already reaching over 80 miles an hour, and there are reports of gusts stronger than that in North Wales this morning. Forecasters are advising travellers to prepare for their journeys carefully, obviously, I guess, but the weather causing problems on the roads and rail networks as well. So let's get a sense of what's happening across the country. We're going to hear from Paul Waters from the AA in a moment. We're going to hear from a representative from the Environment Agency, and we're going to hear from Gareth Wynne-Jones, who's a hill farmer from North Wales. I've been told it's very windy where he is, but he's a hill farmer, so you would expect that, I guess, wouldn't you? But we'll hear from all of those in a second. But our reporter Jane Peel is with us as well. Morning, Jane.
Good morning.
Round up, really, some of the travel disruption that we've got. Where do you want to start? On the trains?
Yeah, I think so, because there is quite a lot of disruption, both as a result of the storm and also planned engineering works, of course, which were due to happen over the Christmas period anyway. I'll do some of the worst affected areas, and I'll do them in alphabetical order, I hope, so that if anybody is listening out for their particular trains, they'll know what's happening. Arriva trains in Wales say they have minor delays on some routes, so not too bad there. Cross country are talking about major delays, particularly north of Doncaster. There are speed restrictions on the line as a result of high winds, and that is adding about an hour to some journeys. East Coast also have major delays in the north of England. In addition, they have planned engineering works affecting services through Peterborough. So they say that they've lifted travel restrictions, so passengers can travel at any time, even if they have tickets for today. That includes being able to travel tomorrow, but of course they're saying services will be very busy. But the message there from East Coast is don't travel today unless you have to. East Midlands trains have major delays on some routes. First TransPennine Express have major delays and some cancellations. ScotRail have buses replacing trains on some of their routes. South West Trains have a bus replacement service between Hazelmere and Petersfield, and that is going to happen, they say, until further notice, and probably for at least 7 days, because they have damage caused by flooding to embankments at 4 separate locations. There's also a reduced service into London Waterloo. Nearly there. South Eastern are not operating any trains at all until midday. Because they're still checking the tracks for fallen trees and debris, except that is the high-speed service between Ashford International and London St Pancras, and a shuttle service between Tunbridge and Tunbridge Wells. Southern has weather damage to the signalling system near Selhurst and also a landslip, so they've got some problems too. And Virgin trains say all services north of Preston are running at a reduced speed until 4 o'clock today, so some delays there will be of up to an hour as well. So I think the message is, if you haven't heard anything there, it's wise to check with your train company if you are planning to travel today, and if you don't have to travel today, don't.
It's a good point though, isn't it, Jack? Because there would have been a lot of people who would have avoided all of this if they've been at home or if their family's around the corner or what have you, but it's going to be interesting to see how much of this is still in place once people start going back to work, so we'll keep an eye on that. And in fact, Jane, I think the last 2 minutes, the definition of public service broadcast.
Well, I hope I've been of some service to some people at least.
I'm sure you will have been, thank you. That's our reporter Jane Peel. Let's speak to Paul Waters from the AA and also Jonathan Day, who's the head of flood programme at the Environment Agency. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Paul Waters, how have the last few days been for the AA then in terms of call-outs and such like?
Pretty busy. Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas Eve, was very busy. We've been out to probably about 800 people stuck in floodwater over that time, and we're still getting calls to people stuck in floodwater. We had somebody yesterday who had just taken delivery of a new car, I think it was, 2 days old, drove straight into a flood, and it's pretty much written off, I think. So,
and it's interesting, I heard someone from the Environment Agency, and Jonathan's there and can advise us on this, but it's a very small amount of water, isn't it, Jonathan? Actually, it's less than you'd think that could get you into trouble in a car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our advice would be that if you're seeing flood water while you're driving, just don't drive through it.
What was the
2 inches of fast-moving water can take your car for the wheel.
I saw the figure of 30 centimetres.
Yeah.
Paul, are there any situations in which you wouldn't get help, that you kind of blow your cover, if you like, in terms of the way you act as a motorist with flooding?
I think the first thing to think of is the end game, which is if you write your car off having passed through a road closed sign, you may find your insurance company won't pay out. So that's quite an important thing to bear in mind. And also, yes, of course, I mean, we go to people stuck in floodwater if we can, but it may be an insurance job, it may be beyond the scope of even what we can do, even though we've got special teams who can help. So, yeah, don't get yourself into it in the first place. I mean, one of the people that we went to help, I think it was yesterday, the patrol asked, why they're driven into sort of pretty deep water, and they said, well, it's the only way they know to get home. Well, that still doesn't mean you write your car off. So, and I think we have to sort of adapt to the conditions and, try to accept that the elements sometimes beat us.
Indeed. Paul, thank you. Paul Waters, who's from the AA. Just continuing with you, Jonathan Day from the Environment Agency. The tricky situation is that a lot of the land is already very saturated here, and even if some of it has dissipated over the last sort of 24 hours, 48 hours or so, more rain coming could create real problems again for a lot of people.
That's right. As you've heard, there's been more rainfall overnight, and major river systems are continuing to respond to that. So we still have concerns, I'm afraid, around river flooding in Kent and around the Lower Thames in particular. And while we may have a couple of days of slightly more benign weather, the forecast continues run at a settled way into next week. So we're really urging people to take care and to take the flood risk, sign up to free flood warnings, and just keep an eye on local media, the Environment Agency website and Twitter feeds to make sure you're good aware.
And what do you actually do? What practically happens when your teams arrive into areas which have been hit by flooding? What are the kind of things they do?
Well, our teams work in partnership with local authorities and the emergency service in terms of responding to flooding. But I think there's an awful lot that people can do themselves when they receive flood warnings, such as moving valuable goods and particularly kind of personal items of sentimental value upstairs to reduce the consequences of flooding, even if the flooding itself is unavoidable.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. That's Jonathan David, the Environment Agency. Let's have a quick word as well with Gareth Wynne-Jones, as I say, hill farmer in North Wales. It's windy where Gareth is. How is it, Gareth?
Pretty bloody at the moment, there's quite a bit of damage. I'll just jump into the Land Rover, I can hear you.
Jump into the Land Rover. Get yourself in.
Oh.
What a relief. I feel relieved for you.
Oh, yeah, it's really bad. There's a couple of stone walls come down. We're just at the moment checking on the stock and ensuring that all the drains are clear. There's a tree I've just passed now that's split in half. Just absolutely, literally, just split right in half. I have just tweeted that so people can have a look at it. There's branches on some really big oaks that are snapped like matchsticks. I've never seen anything like it. It's very, very bad, to be honest with you.
Sorry,
it's the blast, Chris, it's the blast. It's so strong. You're just so frightened. This Land Rover takes me everywhere, but it feels like a little tin shed that's getting blown around. I'm just so frightened. I won't even go out on the quad today because I think the quad would just turn over. It's that kind of gust,
But you must be getting up into some pretty kind of hairy places in the Range Rover and Land Rover in the first place, even without all the winds.
Yeah, really. I mean, with this on top of it, you can just get a little gust that'll push you into some dangers, and off you go like a sledge, really. So you've got to be really, really careful. We're walking the walls, in big places because there's a possibility that the wind can blow the walls onto the sheep, and we can have losses there. So it's watching after the stock. We've got to carry on. Christmas holidays or not, this is what it takes to put food on your plate.
Well, we appreciate it. I mean, it's interesting to hear you saying this is bad because you must be pretty used to the windy weather. It must get pretty hairy. But just in terms of the stock, because there's a sheep farmer in our family, actually, my wife's family, and I think in terms of safety for the animals, don't they have a bigger problem with really, really heavy rain than they would with winds?
I think it's a little bit of both, because we've got a lot of valleys up here and a lot of rivers, and sheep are sheep, and if they try and cross a river or forced to cross a river, they can be taken down by the river as well. The wind, because of these stone walls are really old, and some of them have been weakened with the snow this year, and it's just one gust like this can push them over, and as you know, that's where the sheep will go to shelter. Anything, this is where I go to shelter. So it'll be minimum damage, I think, with the stock, hopefully. But there's a few sheds that have been hit pretty bad in our area. There's a few garden sheds. I'm hoping to ever see them again. I think they've gone over to Ireland. All this wind. It's been one heck of a year, 2013, and I don't think it's going to let us forget very, very quickly that it's going out with a big bang as the way it came in with the spring, really.
When are you going to get back inside, Gareth?
Oh, the wife's making me some lovely homemade soup, so that'll warm me up. So I should be down for about 12:15, and then I'll get some grub, and then we'll have to get back out again.
Oh, come on.
Walls down, so we'll have to get these gates put up because it's too dangerous to be lifting the walls today.
Fine.
You could be blown on top of it.
The walls can wait. The walls can wait. Get some soup, get some mulled wine on the go, and stick on the telly, for goodness sake.
Hey, I wish I could. I wish I could. But no, the sheep and the cattle and the stock come first.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
They're our livelihoods, and we've got to watch after them.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. And look,
I know. I hope you had a good Christmas anyway.
I did indeed. Enjoy the rest of it, and stay safe. I know we're sort of having a bit of a chuckle.
And if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, it's Gareth Wynne-Jones, and you can just follow the rural life of a farmer up in North Wales.
He's trying to get that job on Country File.
Oh, no. Hey, I'm a farmer, not a TV presenter.
Good to see you, Gareth. All right.
And you, mate. Yeah, have a good one. And Happy New Year to when it comes.
To you as well. Gareth Wynne-Jones. He was fun, wasn't he? Hill farmer from North Wales. 20 past 11. So, it's windy in North Wales. If you're out in your car in North Wales, I'm sure you're probably feeling it as well. And, well, as we heard from the AA, Orna, it's a time to just keep an eye out, isn't it, really?
It is really. A lot of motorway signs are showing up speed restrictions. They're all at the expected areas, such as the M6 over Selwall Viaduct in Cheshire and South York.